This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to another season of the Moonlight Graham Show. But say it ain't so. Another baseball lockout. This is not exactly how I wanted to kick off this season of the podcast. In my head, I wanted to bring back the podcast with a new season right as baseball was announcing that baseball is coming back and the lockout is over. But we continue to be at a standstill in the MLB lockout negotiations. And you know what? The show must go on. Even though baseball is in a lockout, the Moonlight Graham Show needs to come back. And so we are back with a new season of the podcast. And to kick it off, I got my good friend Emery Songer in studio as our Moonlighter for this week. And Emery, if you don't know him, he is a radio host on WHO Radio. He's a producer over at iHeartRadio. But even more importantly, this guy is a sports nut. He's a sports junkie, and he's a semi-baseball historian. Any sporting event throughout the Des Moines metro area, whether it's horse races out at Prairie Meadows Track and Casino, whether it's hockey games at the Des Moines Buccaneers Ice Arena, or whether it's just girls basketball games, Emery is probably there. He's probably involved. He's probably calling the game. This guy, wherever there's sports, Emery Songer is not far away. And I know he's a huge baseball fan because I got connected with him a couple of years ago when he was looking for a wood bat league to play in. And sure enough, now Emery and I are teammates in a wood bat league. And this guy just loves baseball. And so who better to bring in studio to talk about our feelings as baseball fans around this lockout, what it means for the game, than Emery? And we don't pretend to be, arbitration attorneys here. I don't pretend to be an expert on every single issue that is being negotiated here in the lockout between the union and between the owners group. But, I've done my research on this. I feel like I have a pretty good idea on the sticking points here and which side and why they're arguing for what points. I've also, dug into a little bit of those Braves financials that were released here recently to get an understanding of what the financial picture of a team in the major leagues might look like, to try to understand both sides of it. But more than anything, as a baseball fan looking forward to opening day, I'm just sad. I'm really sad for the game of baseball. And no matter these issues that either side is arguing about and who's right and who's wrong and who has a better point and who's being more greedy than the other side, the biggest point is baseball is locked out right now, and they're probably going to be canceling games. And baseball cannot afford at this point to have canceled seasons, canceled games, and even just the negative PR around the game is very detrimental to where the health of that sport is at right now. And it just makes me, as a baseball fan, very, very sad. And so, unfortunately, that is the way we are kicking off this season of the Moonlight Graham Show. The show must go on. You got to roll with the punches. And so here we are kicking off this next season of the podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. We really appreciate all your support through the years. It's fun to still be able to do this podcast 250 episodes in. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this upcoming season of the podcast. So let's all say a prayer that baseball comes back here soon, and we have opening day, and the owners and the players can find an agreement, and baseball can be back as the grass gets green, as the snow melts, as the birds come back. It's time for spring, and it's time for baseball. So I bring in baseball fanatic, local celebrity, ?
Thanks.
Emery Songer. Emery, we've been hashing it out for 15 minutes here before we started recording. I think we're both in similar states, but how do you feel right now? How do you feel as a baseball fan right now?
As a fan of the sport of baseball, a sport that came of age in the 1840s in the most pure way, gentlemen having fun, exercising, throwing a ball around and hitting it with a wooden bat. Professionalism poisoned the game in the 1860s, and then we organized in the 1870s and created what truly became the national pastime. And Tim, here we sit 150 years later, looking at billionaires, millionaires, guys that we love to watch saunter on to this green grass in front of these blue skies, and the kids and the grandfathers and everything in between that have sat for generations watching this game. And we're talking about competitive balanced taxes, expanded playoffs, and banning the shift. What happened to us? That's how I feel.
It's depressing. I have always been a guy that would defend baseball at all costs. I love the game. I love the sport. I love Major League Baseball. And so I've never been one to like pile on to negativity about anything. Just not my style. I don't think it does anyone any good. But I kind of got off the Manfred wagon a couple years ago. At first, when Rob Manfred was elected commissioner, I was like, hey, I'm going to give him a chance. You know,
there's no reason to dislike him.
Not. I mean, some people that knew him, you could read some stuff and say, hey, this is a New York City lawyer. He's a negotiator. He's going to side with the owners, and he's going to go hard, and he's heartless, and he doesn't really know or care about the game. There was that was out there, but I said, let's give him a chance. And then essentially everything that's happened with the game of baseball over, really throughout his tenure, I've hated. And now I never thought we'd see another strike lockout during my lifetime because of how ugly and bad it got in 1994. And here we are again. And it's just disheartening. It's frustrating. And to me, and to be clear, I think there's some blame on both sides.
There's definitely blame on both sides.
But I really believe the large majority of the blame is with Rob Manfred and the owners group right now totally being disengaged from the room, not being able to read the room, having zero awareness, and just being completely tone deaf to how baseball is viewed in our country now, to the opportunity that baseball had over the past couple of years with the pandemic that they didn't capitalize. After a great postseason last year with the Braves winning the World Series, there was a great postseason. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of social media activity around baseball, especially coming off of the Field of Dreams game. There was a lot of positives. And then here we are again, and it seems like time in and time out, baseball cannot stop shooting themselves in the foot.
So you and I met during the pandemic, and we had this conversation, I think, as it was happening. But I think in retrospect, it's important to think about the way the return to play in 2020 went down. Because you could pretty much see the writing on the wall with how contentious that negotiation was, how long it took to solve that problem. Tim, they could have been on the field in early June probably for games that mattered in 2020 and had the world to themselves, the sporting world to themselves for 2 solid months. And instead, they started play in late July, early August when the NHL was back and the NBA was back and NASCAR was back and Major League Soccer was back, and they were sharing the spotlight with people from all different sports. They could have had 6 solid weeks of just them trying to get people interested in their game again. And it was too much for them. They could not figure it out. And I look back on that now, it feels like both sides had marked it down. The CBA is going to expire in December of 2021, and we are going hard on what we want. And the players felt that way, and they still feel that way. The owners felt that way, and they still feel that way, to the point where they didn't even come to the table for a month and a half during the lockout that they imposed on the players, and then could not come to an agreement. And then Rob Manfred with his just, you want to talk tone deaf, press conference where he was smiling and joking and laughing and thought, he tried to pretend like he cared or was serious, and then said, we're canceling the first 2 series of games this year. Unthinkable in 2022 that this is happening.
Now, take me back to the pandemic, because from what I remember, and you might remember this better than I do, but from what I remember being really frustrated with the players at that time. And I remember being really frustrated with Tony Clark and a lot of the stuff that was coming out on the player side. And I remember thinking that they were, from the players' end, were too caught up in like the health and safety. And this was early pandemic. So at that time I was like, just get out there and play, guys, that kind of thing. But that's how I remember it. But I don't remember it all that well.
What got me, and I've fallen into this trap a little bit recently the last couple of weeks, all you hear from the players is, we want to play. Put us out there. We want to play. And then you hear that the players have rejected whatever Major League Baseball's proposal was. That was what 2020 was like for weeks. It was over here and over there. Major League Baseball says we can do this. Major League Baseball says we can do that. And the players at every turn were rejecting those offers. So yeah, I'm with you. If you guys really want to play, don't you think at some point you would just play? But now that I'm learning more about it, I feel differently this time, because I do feel like they see this as their best chance to right the wrongs they think have existed in labor negotiations in baseball for decades.
For sure. And that's kind of how I feel too. I felt like I was a little anti-players union back when the pandemic, and now I'm on the other side. I'm more anti-owners, and I think most of the blame lies with the owners here. And I've always been frustrated with the ownership group in baseball, and I've been saying this forever. Baseball has been in such need of a Mark Cuban. They've been in such need of like a dynamic owner that is going to shake things up.
Is Steve Cohen not doing it for you?
Well, I do like Steve Cohen, actually. Too. Yeah, but he just became an owner of the Mets, and the Mets is its own issue.
Right.
But the other owners that have done well are the Ricketts family.
Who is fairly unpopular.
Extremely unpopular.
Yeah.
And I think they're a good example. Maybe we talk about this right now. The Ricketts family, the ownership group of the Red Sox, which LeBron's involved in now. But like these ownership groups, Cubs and Red Sox, and actually the Dodgers ownership
Magic.
Group too, these are all fairly newer ownership groups to baseball within the last 20 years. Dodgers was the first, and then the Red Sox, and then the Ricketts with the Cubs. And they've all brought World Series championships to those major market cities. Now, of course, Ricketts is not popular at all. But look what Ricketts brought a World Series to Chicago. And he's also, what he's done with Wrigleyville was much needed. I know people don't really want to say that, but like
traditionalists don't want to say it. Anybody with a brain would agree.
But it's also part of like the two-sided or the double-edged sword of this discussion right now that's going on. Because what's happening in St. Louis, what's happened in Chicago, what's happened in Atlanta, where they've built these ballpark villages, either around current stadiums like at Wrigley or new stadiums like at Busch and Atlanta, these ownership groups are investing a lot of what potentially could be ballpark dollars or ball team dollars into real estate developments and facilities around the stadiums. So that's one way essentially they can shift and share money a little bit. And so they can report losses, but they are still investing in the product, the overall product.
You make an interesting point there, because if you go back, gosh, the 70s and 80s were really just the diddly-poo era of atmosphere in baseball.
Yeah.
You had your AstroTurf. You had every stadium was cookie-cutter, very symmetrical. There was not a lot of character. I mean, Yankee Stadium gets a lot of publicity as like being an amazing stadium. And in my viewpoint, based on what we have now, it really wasn't. But it stood out like a diamond compared to some of the other, garbage patches that were put together in, at Three Rivers and Candlestick, and the list goes on and
Cincinnati.
on. Right. I mean, just every single one of these, cookie cutter ballparks. And Oakland's the last, thank God, the last of the real garbage ones. But you see Petco Park get dropped in the middle of San Diego, and everybody's like, "Oh man, I think I want to hang out at Padres games a little bit more frequently now." Right? Like
San Francisco.
Yes, and I think Texas missed the mark a little bit with their new stadium, but they're in a completely different development with the suburban area in Dallas, so it's kind of hard to blame them. I mean, downtown Minneapolis, and you can just Target Field fits perfectly down there the way they set it up. Camden Yards was kind of the catalyst for your downtown City View ballparks out in Baltimore, and that place is amazing. I was in Washington, D.C., and got to see Nationals Park for the first time. That's an underrated place, the way they've laid that thing out. And I know a lot of people are like, well, there's no backdrop or anything, but there's like a little village around the outfield of it that makes you feel like I'm in a baseball village right now. And I think that is important to build fans and that experience that you get just going to the games. You go with your dad for the first time when you're 12 years old. You're going to remember that when you go and enjoy play like Wrigley, when you go and enjoy a place like Target Field for the first time, and you get to enjoy a baseball amusement park and then get to watch your heroes play on the field. There's a lot to be said for that investment, and I think baseball, of all of the wrongs they've made over the last 15 years, one thing that I think is great is that almost every team has made it a point that we either need to completely upgrade what we have, or even if it's new like Texas, get a new one. Something that can resonate with our fans more, so the experience makes sense for them to bring the family and try to spend more time with us in the ballpark.
Exactly. And you're exactly right. Part of the Americana of baseball is that experience, and baseball does that better than anyone because it's in the summer. There's 81 games per team per year in every city, so you can really make a lot of bars, restaurants, food, everything work around the park. The downside of that, and a lot of owners have done a nice job investing in that, but it's allowed owners to play with their books a little bit. So you can diversify. They're diversifying, not just being an owner of a baseball team, but they're owning the real estate developments. They're owning a lot of these other developments around, and not all of those turn a profit right away. So they can make investments there, and then it doesn't look on their balance sheets like they're making as much money. So then when you get into negotiations like this, you can say, hey, I lost $50 million last year. And you're like, well, how does that work? You got $300 million from Fox Sports. We saw that. So it's created this tough place that we're in, and I think for good reason. I think both sides have a point, because you want the people that are owning these sports teams to make money. Some of them are making very, very good money, but others are not. And the even more confusing thing about this, even if they aren't making great money and having great returns, the value of their franchises continues to go up. So even though the operating income and the operating profits of the company might not be great for every club, their value continues to go up 15% per year. And that's what makes it really confusing. When you have the owner of, name a team out there, that's complaining that they're not making any money, and all of a sudden, but they bought a team at $300 million, and now that same team worth $1 billion.
Yeah, and it's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's happening in all sports. The difference is, how has the NBA figured out how to market it properly and grow their sport and their league from, let's be honest, pretty vague interest nationwide to the NBA could honestly, for a national show, if you had a national show, you could talk about the NBA every single day of the year. That has been a development over the last 10 years.
Wait a minute. You think the NBA is more popular than the NFL?
No, but it's a 300, like the NFL has always been a 365. The NFL, Pete Rozelle in the 60s was way ahead of the game and was able to build all of his brands equally. He wasn't just, well, we need Dallas to be in the Super Bowl every year for people to care about our sport. Baseball is stuck in, well, if the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Red Sox or the Cubs are not involved, America's not going to watch. There's this stupid thing that if somehow Milwaukee and Tampa were to play each other in the World Series, that would be horrific for baseball. Why? So what basketball did to avoid this, gosh, the last thing we need is the New Orleans Pelicans and Charlotte Hornets to play in the NBA Finals. Well, they have marketed star players and not the teams specifically. So I look at the way Adam Silver and David Stern before him over the last 10 to 15 years have marketed players. And yes, it's a more individualistic sport, but if you think about baseball history, we remember the players. Okay, if you go through all of the years, we even remember the managers. We remember the Connie Macks and the John McGraws. We remember the Babe Ruth and the Lou Gehrig. I mean, you could remember characters like Dizzy Dean if you really got into the thick of baseball history. And here we are in an era with Mike Trout, Fernando Tatis Jr., some of the most colorful characters that we've seen come to baseball in the last 20 years are entering their prime now. And we can't get people to recognize Mike Trout on the street? How have we failed so miserably in that regard?
Yeah, baseball has done a poor job of marketing the stars. I think they've gotten better. I think they've gotten better, and there are so many young stars in the game. I would, and you're exactly right about the NBA. I think the difference between the NBA and the NFL is in the NBA, fans are more curious about what's happening off the court than they are on the court.
Yeah, player movement is half of the intrigue.
And the problem with the NBA right now, in my opinion, is you've got hundreds of millions of dollars in salary for people that just are refusing to play, or the team has asked them not to play because the team is tanking. The story of the season thus far has been James Harden trying to get out of Brooklyn and Ben Simmons refusing to play for Philadelphia, he's now with Brooklyn. They swapped spots, and then John Wall making $44 million down in Houston and being told not to play. Like there's that Zion Williamson, another one of the biggest stars ever to come into the NBA the last 20 years, is not playing because he's too fat right now.
He's got his own, he's got health issues.
And then football, though, I think people really care about because of fantasy football and everything else, and it's become part of our American lifestyles to watch football on Sundays.
And that's football's advantage is it plays once a week, and most people have the day they play off.
Right.
You're not working. There is such a thing as fatigue, especially when baseball's played every day. And the reason baseball is not in a good place, I think, mentally for a lot of people. And this is a theory because I still love it. I loved watching the random Thursday day games, like a travel day, like we got to play at noon so we can get out of here at 4. I love those. I just flip it on. Then they show that, the Rogers Center in Toronto has 5,000 people in it to watch the game, and you realize people's lives are happening right now, and the last thing they care about is a mid-June game between the Blue Jays and the Rays. And I don't think the schedule needs to change or anything. That's not what I'm getting at. But we haven't – the meaning of those games, like these are just guys out here playing. We don't live in a time now with the NFL's news cycle 365 days a year, and now the NBA's news cycle is 365 days a year. And now a lot of people consider politics a sport, the way that you have battling and picking teams and – all that stuff on social media, and you can't get away from it if you're even kind of interested in it. And baseball is having to settle somewhere underneath that. And then, unless you really, really care about the Blue Jays or Rays, you didn't even know that they played a game this afternoon in the Rogers Center in Toronto. We have lost the meaning of what the games are. And I think we're missing the core of the sport because I'm seeing a big social media push now for college baseball and the charm that it brings, because there is kind of an energy, a youthfulness, a raucous atmosphere. I mean, you turn on the television and watch some SEC baseball right now, and you hear that crowd, and you hear everybody cheering all the time. They have their own little chants and everything. I'm like, man, this is electric. How was I not watching college baseball before right now? And it's because we forgot that, yes, Major League Baseball is the king of baseball.
But it's not the sport.
But the game of baseball is why we love it.
You're exactly right, Emery. And to that point, one of the things that has frustrated me so much about baseball through the years is we've been focusing on the wrong things the whole time. We tinker with the rules. Oh, we need instant replay. Oh, we need bigger bases. Oh, we need a universal DH. Oh, we need a pitch clock. Oh, we got, all of these little things that they're trying to tinker. And to your point about college baseball doesn't have any of those rule changes. And the game is great. And now that's
they do have universal DH though.
What's that?
They do have like the pitchers can bat, but
that's been around forever. Like
Yeah,
that hasn't been a recent rule change.
You're right.
But the replay and all these other things, like you don't have that. They're not talking about bigger bases in college baseball to try to fix the game. It's like, no, the game is great.
and they're going and playing.
Right.
Like they just play the game because those guys love to play baseball.
Same thing what you see with the KBO, right? The Korean Baseball League. Look how fun that looks. And look how crazy the Asian culture is about baseball. Look at South America and the Caribbean culture about baseball. They're crazy about it because, to your point, the game is great. And no matter what Major League Baseball does to try to mess it up, the game is still a great, great game.
Absolutely.
And I love how some of the shift and some of the conversation has gone to that. It's like, hey, if Major League Baseball doesn't happen, we still have minor league baseball. We still have town team baseball. We still have independent league baseball. We still have Korean baseball, Chinese baseball, the Caribbean series, college baseball at
high
5
school
different
baseball
levels.
starting in May here in the state of Iowa.
And so, perfect game baseball right here out of the state of Iowa. There's so much great baseball out there, but ultimately the best baseball in the world is Major League Baseball, and that's why we get it right. That's why they got to get it right.
And by a wide margin. And that's another argument that you and I kind of had before we got on the air, and we can go ahead and just
Let's have it.
go right into it. So you have 25-man rosters, 40-man roster, I guess, technically under the Major League umbrella, right? 40 times 30, that's like 1,200 guys. So if we take those 1,200 guys, right, and they say, I'm not playing. You guys have ruined the game for me, and we have to go to the next 40 guys. Now, everybody's got, between 150 and 180 guys on, like, under their affiliation umbrellas. All right, well, let's get the next 40 and get them ready. How much of a difference are you going to notice on the field? I think it'll be pretty noticeable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're replacing an entire 1,200 people.
If we're going to basically, I mean, what would that be? Like somewhere between AA and AAA baseball would essentially become Major League Baseball. That would be like Korean baseball.
It's a big gap. Big gap.
Now, I find Korean baseball to be entertaining because the pitching isn't as dominant. The pitching and hitting kind of cancel each other out, right? It's like, well, you want the best pitchers in the world are going to dominate weaker hitters. Well, if they're both of the AA variety, you're not going to, I think, notice that much. But you're not seeing the highlight reel plays. You're seeing a little bit sloppier defense. You're seeing a lot more walks. You're seeing batters that can't hit the ball over the wall with as much frequency. You can't. I mean, your flamethrowers are now throwing 94 instead of 102. You know that.
Yeah, there's a big. Jeff Passan had a tweet, and Jeff Passan's been a great follow on this whole deal.
He's just
here.
a great follow in general, but his detail on this particular matter has been very.
His
very
tweet
good.
the other day was, if you replace the 1,200 players of Major League Baseball with the next 1,200 best players in the world, you're going to notice a big difference. If you replace every owner of every Major League team, all 30
Would you
owners,
notice at all?
You probably wouldn't notice at all. And he's exactly right. And that's where it comes back to more of the onus on this is on the owners.
Right.
The problem on the player side is that there's never going to be a shortage of people that would play for peanuts in this world.
But that's where the argument becomes, though, is at what cost?
At what cost? Exactly.
Right. If you're willing to put up with the current conditions, and then when you become what you think is a star in whatever this league becomes, once we have eliminated the 1,200 best players that we have, and you decide that you and the union, I would assume that they would try to form, well, we want better pay, or we want to have free agency a couple of years earlier than you're guaranteeing it to us, and we want to be taken care of in a lot of different ways, and the younger players should get paid more right out of the gates. And then we're back where we started, right? I feel like that would become a perpetual scenario of the owners just pushing around whoever they want and saying, look, we've seen you guys before. You know, a generation before you tried to do the same thing. And you know what we did? We just canceled games, didn't pay you until you caved, and then when our deal expired, a different group of guys came trying to do the same thing. You know what we did? We locked them out. We canceled games, didn't pay them. They caved, And then the next generation came, and they tried to do the same thing. And you know what we did? We locked them out. We didn't pay them. They eventually caved. I think what the current players see is this is the moment. This is the Curt Flood moment of this generation. Somebody's got to do something and stand up for what they think is right for the rest of eternity for baseball, because they know if they cave too much right now, the things that they're trying to get changed will never change, ever.
And as a fan, I would argue that some of those points that they are just so hell-bent on getting changed aren't that important.
Which one specifically?
The things that are still left on the table.
And it's a laundry list.
Here's the laundry list of the things.
Okay.
First of all, free agency. They wanted free agency to start sooner than 6 years, right?
6 full years.
6 full years.
Yeah. And that's a long time.
I believe that has been flexible, though. I believe there was a compromise on that. I'm not sure exactly what it was yet, but it sounds like the ownership group was willing to come down at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep. Same kind of concept here. Salary arbitration could start sooner, after 2 years than 3 years. And to that point, there would then be like a bonus pool for the Chris Bryants of the world or the Aaron Judges of the world that hit it big really early. There'd be added bonuses for winning rookie of the year, MVP votes for those type of salary arbitration eligible players. So like the owners compromise there. Minimum salary, they want an increase. Both sides agreed to an increase. We don't know exactly what yet.
Well, it sounded like they were far apart because the players, this is one of their hellbent things. They were like, I think 700 or 750,000 was like the lowest they would go.
And
that's
it was currently 570.
Right. And I mean, that's a big increase in one shot. And of course, we're sitting out here talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when you talk about trying to meet them at that point for a large chunk, I mean, a majority of these players that we're talking about here within affiliated baseball are going to fall under that umbrella. So take that times 70% of each team's roster. That's going to add up to a team's bottom line if it were to jump that much at one time.
Right. Expanded postseason from 10 teams to 14.
Okay.
They came to an agreement on 12.
Right. So where are you on this? I know you are a traditionalist when it comes to this.
I am. I guess where I'm at is find an agreement. Don't let this lock us out.
So, but theoretically, though, if the owners are like, okay, they'll agree on 12 now, but it's going to work toward 14 later. They feel like 14, and there are whispers already, Tim, about does baseball want to expand to places like Montreal? Does Portland, Oregon deserve a team? Does Charlotte, North Carolina get a major league team eventually? I think the idea is to try to get to 32 organizations in Major League Baseball and then push it. I think the NFL is kind of working their way toward 16 teams as well.
Well, NBA is going to expand in Seattle and in Vegas.
Right, and that's all but official, but you can already see the seeds planted with this little play-in tournament now that 20 of the 30 teams that they have right now are making the playoffs in some way. Even if it's a little play-in tournament, they're still in postseason play. Baseball historically has been very picky about the teams that get into what they consider postseason play. It wasn't until, our dads were kids when they finally decided, okay, well, we should do championship series leading into the World Series.
Right. I don't have any problem with this.
So you think 14, 16, like...
No, I mean, do I love it? No. But, this is... baseball needs to have adjustments. I'd rather baseball tinker with how many teams get into the postseason than baseball doing robot umpires, expand the bases. I think that's sacred territory. How many teams get into the playoffs? Who cares? I don't care as long as it drives more interest in the game.
And I think it will, but I also think it's going to even further tank your mid-June game between the Orioles and the Angels.
You know what? To that point, though, I think that what baseball has is it's on all the time. For 5 months out of the year, baseball is on all the time, right? Every sports bar you go into, there's a baseball game going on. And frankly, I think that's the Americana part of it, that very few people really care about who wins the game that they're even watching or going to. They just want a good experience. And so baseball can't lose out on the games. That's their so like shortening the season from 162 to 140, I think that kills baseball because it lessens their inventory. I think the best thing about baseball is just that every summer night, it's on TV. You can go to a game if you're in one of those cities.
Well, it would be interesting if we expand the playoffs and then you see ratings dip a little bit in local television markets because regular season interest isn't nearly as much. I mean, if you're a team that is great, you're never going to have to sweat making the actual playoffs. If you're teams that's, like trying to become on the rise, sure, start winning games that playoffs. If the Miami Marlins are trying to make the playoffs, people down in Florida might care a little bit more about it. But it'd be interesting to see if the ratings start dipping in local TV markets because regular season interest has gone down and general attendance numbers, because we know it is expensive to go to a Major League game, usually, especially for us living in the middle of nowhere in Major League Baseball world, where you have to go 5 hours to the nearest Major League ballpark. It is expensive to go. It's kind of a hassle to go when you live this far away. And now the games mean even less. For us, that's not a problem. We just love the experience of going. But to get the casual fan that baseball...
You think the casual fan's going to make a decision on the playoffs expanding by 2 more teams?
I think... Well,
I don't think the casual fan is putting all that thought into their ticket purchasing.
No, but if you are a casual fan and you are casual not of baseball, but of your team, if you live in the outskirts of Cincinnati and you're a casual Reds fan, and if they're winning a little bit or have a shot to like make a run toward the playoffs or whatever, like you're thinking to yourself, oh yeah, I'll probably watch them more frequently, or I'll go to a game every once in a while. If you know that 16 teams make it in, they're either a shoe-in or they're not a shoe-in, it just feels like it lessens the importance of the games. Now, the NFL added a team to the playoffs, but they also added a game to the season within a year of that happening.
But it also adds more meaningful games for more teams throughout the year because there's more teams in it for longer.
And I agree with that, but at the same time, it does water down the markets that have the good teams, right?
Right. So,
there's a give and take in there, and I think in a traditionalist sense, I think that this is dangerous if you're trying to grow interest in your sport on a casual fan level, because I think you're going to get maybe some casual fans in certain markets, depending on where their team is in the hierarchy of baseball, that become interested for maybe a year because the Marlins decided they were going to be good for a year. Or will it actually be like, well, I don't need to go to the ballpark as much because it feels like these games don't even matter anymore if I'm going to...
But there's 162 games. How many fans out there thought that every game mattered the way it is?
I mean, if you look at the races at the end of the season, you could make the argument that they do.
I know, and now there'll be even more races.
There'll be the same number of races.
Well,
they'll just be worse teams in those races.
This is the last thing on my list that would have been argued.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, I just like where we're at to like get into groups about purists and traditionalists seems so ridiculous when we're talking about locking out the game of baseball. So I guess my point is when I look at this list and to kind of round it out, it's like some of the rule changes like the universal DH, uniform ads, revenue sharing, international draft. Like if you looked at that and you read at where they're at in negotiating, and I was reading up on it this morning, there was compromises on most of these.
Remember the night before when they expanded to Tuesday afternoon, it seemed like they were going to get it done.
It was like 8 out of the 10 things they had agreed on. And the things that they have not agreed on, from what I've read, are number one, the competitive balance tax or the luxury tax.
Right.
So this is currently the luxury tax is if you have a payroll of over $210 million in a given year, then the first time you exceed that $210 million that year, you'll pay a luxury tax of 20%, anything over $210 million. So if you pay $220 million in payroll, you're going to have 20% of $10 million, so an extra $2 million that you're paying that I believe is distributed out amongst the other teams. I'm not sure exactly how it's distributed out, but I believe it goes to like the lower, the smaller market teams, most of it, the way it's distributed. Not sure the exact. And then
the lower payroll teams.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. If you go over if you go over $20 million over, it's an additional 12%. If you go over $40 million over, so $250 million, it's an additional 42.5%. So you're essentially paying 62.5% tax on top of the extra $40 million that you're paying. So it's essentially a salary cap. It's very, very detrimental. And if you go over it multiple years in a row, the penalties get even worse.
Right. But it has, for the deep pocket teams, it's not a hard cap.
No, not at all.
So you have that benefit of, if you really feel like you got a window and you're willing to spend for a short time frame to hopefully, like in the Dodgers case, like guarantee a ring. It took them a little bit, but they were eventually able to get it done.
It's essentially, if you're paying $220 in payroll, you're essentially got to factor in another $5 million. So you're essentially paying $225.
But the reason this is important is because of the other end. It's the money that this ends up going to help the teams that aren't paying people really at all. If you look at some of the worst teams in baseball last year and their payroll, it's honestly embarrassing. And it's not because they don't have more money. It's because this was how the formula works in the previous CBA. The Houston Astros were the first to successfully do it, and it was horrifying, but it resulted in them having multiple World Series appearances and a World Championship, where they literally got rid of everybody who was worth anything on their major league roster and traded them for multiple prospects and some international money or other assets, essentially, that they could use to build a team for the future, and then hope that that team over 3 or 4 years matured together. We saw it with the Cubs, won them a World Series, and that was supposed to be a dynasty. Didn't, because baseball is hard, it didn't turn out to be a dynasty, but that was how they built their team. My favorite team, the White Sox, they are now bubbling after a 5-year rebuild of this kind. You've been told, if you manage this properly, if you really suck and don't spend any money for 5 years, and you win 55 games a year and are just a complete embarrassment to baseball, but you do well in doing your scouting and getting good prospects and addressing your needs through the draft and using your international signing money wisely, and then making the right free agent signings as your team kind of matures, and then plugging the holes the right way, and then when it's time to buy, making that right deadline deal, and all of a sudden you're a contender. But the process is at least 4 or 5 years to do that, and then you got these teams like the Tigers, and, I mean, it looks like the Orioles have a good farm system, but, I mean, they haven't spent money since 2015-ish of any kind, really. At what point do you start seeing these teams and forcing them now to have to try to win by investing money? The one thing the White Sox did do was, with some of their younger prospects, was lock them up to long-term contract extensions immediately before they even got to the big leagues, because they think that's the smart investment long-term, so they don't have to worry about this service time or this arbitration or these bonuses or testing free agency in the middle of their World Series window.
So where the competitive balance tax is at from a negotiation standpoint, the owners were willing to take it up from $210 million to $220. They want to keep that number low so that they don't have to have a bigger salary.
Right, because then you're going to be doling out $250 million contracts to 4 guys on the team at once.
Exactly. And then the union wants to take it up to $245. And they've just been hard, for whatever reason, $245 is the number, and they have not moved off that number. The owners started at $214, which I thought was a funny number. They raised it by $4 million from the $210. Then they went up to $215, and then now they're at $220. They're still $25 million apart. And I guess from my vantage point, like, is this that important to the players that they are just like, they feel like they're all going to go broke if they don't get an extra $25 million in, across the salary cap? Whereas, like, what I don't understand, and this is another conversation, but I think a salary floor makes way more sense than whatever this competitive balance tax. It just seems stupid across the board to me.
And we would solve both of our problems if we did it that way.
Yeah, just institute a floor, and obviously the owners probably would. That's probably a non-starter for them. But I guess I just don't see the benefit to the players long term to really dig in their feet here over this. Like, I get it. Like, you're going to get bigger contracts.
More bigger contracts per team.
Exactly. Yeah. More bigger contracts per team. But, I mean, the guys that are getting the bigger contracts are fine right now. It's the guys that are not, that the CBA is really working for and that the players are talking about fighting for, is the guys that's like, hey, they only spend 3 years in the major leagues and they got to make all this money in the time that they have. It's like, this is not affecting. This is the opposite. Yeah. This is not affecting those guys at all.
Well, this is affecting your top end guys and
your mid-level guys.
And let's be honest, how many baseball ownership groups outside of your major market guys that we talked about earlier are going to regularly feel like spending up to $230 to $240 baseline in payroll? There's a lot of ownership groups in Major League Baseball. I mean, gosh, look at the A's. For decades, it's been this way, where as soon as a guy got too expensive for them, they just cut him loose. They traded him away. They didn't worry about the repercussions of their on-field product because they trusted that their scouting department, their general manager, could figure out a way to solve that Rubik's Cube and keep them competitive at a lower payroll. That does not, like, raising that means it's just going to continue to keep the rich richer. The rich teams are only going to be allowed to get more big money guys. And yeah, maybe, you know, a third or a fourth guy per team is going to make $40, $50 million a year one day if you're able to get it up to that number. But I don't think that helps your competitive balance in baseball,
right? Because
the teams that are going to be able to get to that number to begin with are the teams that are already into the luxury tax.
Yeah, and if anything, keeping that number lower actually makes it easier for teams to hit the luxury tax, which would create more sharing amongst the other teams.
And instead of it being the same 5 teams signing guys to giant contracts, now all of a sudden you might see a couple of big contracts being doled out by the Seattle Mariners every once in a while.
Yeah, so I guess maybe I don't totally understand that, right? And I'm sure I don't. Like, I'm not an expert.
There's lawyers
here
figuring this out, but I think we're on the right track as to what it means and what each side wants. It's weird that this is a bigger sticking point than some of the other things that we've talked about.
Right. And then the other one is the amount that would go into the pre-arbitration player bonus pool. So this is something that the owners agreed that they would be willing to do for the guys like Aaron Judge and Chris Bryant. We've seen it through the years. It's like, this guy was Rookie of the Year and he's making $570,000. Isn't that amazing? Well, now it's like, if you win Rookie of the Year and you're on a minimum salary because you're not even arbitration eligible yet, or you are in like the first year of arbitration or second year of arbitration, that an amount of money would go into this bonus pool for those players that qualify, right? Now, the numbers on that are very far apart. The owners started at $10 million for that bonus pool, and they raised it up to 15. The players are hard at $100 million, and they have not moved off that number. $100 million for a pool that previously did not exist. Now, this gets more to the guy that could potentially, the Marty Cordova, right? Guy in the 90s who won the Rookie of the Year with the Minnesota Twins, was out of the league 5 years later and never really signed a big deal. This pre-arbitration player bonus pool would have paid Marty Cordova nicely. But I think that's the type of player that this is solving the issue for.
Yeah, but at the same time, where's $100 million coming from in one shot, right? They seem to think that there's $100 million that can be forked over for this annually. And I understand why they would do that, But this falls in line with the same things that you were talking about earlier that were, the big topics of conversation. Service time, how quickly they can get into arbitration. It's basically that these players don't have negotiating rights in baseball, most of them, until they get on the field and try to earn it through arbitration, historically, and then try to get themselves to free agency, or hopefully their club decides to pony up earlier and lock them down with a big contract so they don't have to worry about that. Not everybody's Juan Soto and can see $500 million in his future. But I'm looking at all of these things, and I know they're trying to protect players for the future. This is a lot of power that you're trying to take away from guys who have historically had all of the power in baseball. Right. The owners. And even this generation of owners isn't the same as when Curt Flood decided he was going to test the reserve clause and finally allow free agency to happen. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with the reserve clause, just see what players who were disgruntled had to deal with. I mean, it was either they would get blackballed from the league if they left and try to go to a rival league, or they were just stuck in the spot that they were. They had no power, zero power, until Curt Flood was able to open the floodgates and open up free agency. And now they're trying to kick that door down, and then the door behind it, and then the door behind it, all in one fell swoop, because they don't feel like they're going to have a better time leverage-wise to do this. And all three of these things are huge concessions for the owners, considering that when you have a great player and you have him cheap, it gives you a ton of flexibility to get more free agents to try to capitalize on your window. You hear about it in the NFL all the time. The best time to win a Super Bowl is when your quarterback's on his rookie contract, because you don't have to pay him a ton of money. You have plenty of salary cap flexibility. But in the NFL, those guys can be due a...
There's non-guaranteed contracts in the NFL. That's the other thing with the baseball. It's all guaranteed contracts.
100%.
And, yeah, so to your point... Now, I'm not trying to be all on the owner side. I guess my frustration, though, is that I don't know if now was the right time for the players to dig in their heels. It just seemed like now was the time to make a deal. And I'm saying that now. But the real issue on the timing of it really does go back to the owners.
Right. We lost 41 days for no reason.
Exactly.
In December and January.
Everything that is happening now could have been happening 3 months ago and should have been happening 3 months ago. And Manfred and the owners used this timeline to cancel games, knowing it would hurt the players more than it would hurt the owners, as a bargaining chip. And that's BS. And that's what makes me hate Rob Manfred. Now, the players' union should have seen this coming. They knew this was coming. So they should have been, all 41 days of that, should have been beating down the doors of the baseball offices to force the negotiations to occur. I don't care about...
Didn't hear a peep from them.
Didn't hear a peep. I don't care about the pride. I don't care about this other stuff. Everybody's so high and mighty and proud here. Get a deal done, because ultimately I am blaming both sides when it comes to abandoning the fans. This is not time for PR moves. This is a time to get a deal done to get baseball back on the field.
I see those 41 days as, like you said, it was a huge leverage scenario. Because if we got to an 11th hour situation, the owners and Commissioner Manfred decided that they would probably get the players' union to cave if they knew that cancellation of games were on the line. They were going to hold tight to the numbers that you had just given on a lot of those points, because they knew at the end of the day the players are going to need to play. So when the players didn't play ball with them in these negotiations and said, fine, cancel games, I think that probably took them by surprise a little bit. That's why you heard Tony Clark say, we're not surprised. We're disgusted, but this is not a surprise to us, and that's sad. But it's because they knew that the 41 days they could have been negotiating that they weren't negotiating were so the owners could shorten the negotiating window.
Exactly.
That way, they could use the cancellation of games as even further leverage, and the players didn't bite. They said, look, if there was ever a time to stand firm here and to stay united in what we believe, now is the time. And it comes at the total expense to the fans, to the total expense of the people who have invested their love and their heart to season tickets, to following teams and buying merch religiously like you and me. I mean, and I don't feel so bad for you and me because you and I love baseball. But
yeah, I feel bad for the kids,
but for
and
the
I feel
8-year-old,
bad for like the 70-year-olds
right,
who just are looking forward to watching baseball on their television. That's who I feel bad
or hearing it
for.
on the radio, or
Yeah.
they had tickets to an early April game, in Milwaukee, and they were all going to go as a family and make memories, and now they just found out that series has been canceled because a bunch of millionaires and billionaires are arguing over sticking points like the competitive balance tax.
Right. So, like I said, I think what the owners did is BS on the timing, but I also I'm confused about the sticking points a little bit with the players.
Okay, so here's a question. Do you think that this gets done in a reasonable timeline?
I don't know. It
that,
does
that,
not.
that number on the bonus is insanely far apart.
Yeah, I think there's so much distrust. The fact that we only see the financial numbers for one Major League Baseball team, I think the players all think that the owners are literally just sitting on hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in cash, which I also don't think is true. But there's so much distrust that the players are going to dig in because they don't believe a word that comes out of Manfred or the owner's mouths. Now, getting into the financial side of it, the Braves, being that they are owned by a publicly traded company, you can see their financial statements, right? And so we saw the Braves, who won the World Series last year, what their financial statements look like. So in 2021, the Atlanta Braves, World Series champions, national brand, should have been a banner year for them from a revenue standpoint. Things could not have been better, with the exception of the pandemic, which brought down some of the revenue, for sure.
Sure.
In 2021, the Braves brought in $526 million in revenue. It's a nice company, nice business.
I mean, if I ran a business and had that number, I'd be very happy.
Player payroll out of that 526 was $148 million. Okay, so they did not have to pay the luxury tax, or well under that luxury tax. So 28% of overall revenue went to pay the players. If you look at how that relates to other industries, the NFL, 48% of NFL revenue goes to pay the players, but that's a much bigger pie. NFL teams, because there's less of them and there's less games, so there's less expenses to have those games, they make a bigger piece of the revenue than the baseball players does. But if you look at like other industries, that can range from 20% all the way up to, I think I'm in the insurance industry, about 60 to 70% of our revenue goes to payroll, but it's a different industry. Okay, so I don't really know how that 28% falls in.
Right, and it's one of 30 examples.
And it's one of 30 examples.
Yeah.
Overall operating income, okay, so not net income, but the operating income of the Braves was $111 million last year. So out of that, to get to your net income would be, you'd still take out your interest, inventory write-offs, I wrote these down, payments to settle lawsuits and other things that might have just popped up for one specific year. But operating income, which is how you kind of value the valuation of companies, $111 million, which is 21% of overall revenue. So they're not their net income, but their operating income percentage was 21%. So it's a pretty healthy business, but it's not like 70% profit margin. It's not like 40% profit margin.
They're not making billions of dollars a year.
No, and their net income is under 20%. And that was the World Series champions, national brand baseball team. Now, we haven't seen everybody's numbers, but what do the Rays look like? I doubt it's better than the Braves.
Oh, it's certainly, well, gosh, you wouldn't think, but
the payroll is so much
payroll
less.
is way lower. And I'm sure their general expenses are lower.
What was their payroll? Probably $80,000.
Or $80 million, you mean?
$80 million?
It might be a hair higher than that because they did sign some guys.
But to that point, they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't win the World Series. They're not the Braves. So they probably did not make $450 million in overall revenue.
Yeah.
If the Braves made $526.
But they made the World Series in 2020. Right, and I know 2020 was even a weirder year.
Right.
But, I mean, this is a healthy team. They won the American League East. I mean, they were one of the best teams in baseball all year long. Active payroll going into this year for the Rays, and I know that they would have some time to fill a gap or two. $69.8 million.
Yeah, that's low.
Wow.
And my point is not to say that all these teams are losing money and poor billionaire owners. That's not my point. But we want baseball to be in a healthy cash flow position as well. And there's probably the bottom third or fourth of the league that is not making over 10% margin. They just probably aren't, and the Rays probably aren't either. And, and the Twins might. I don't know. But we don't see their numbers, so I don't really know.
Right. You just have to ballpark figure that, and that's the dangerous game that we're playing here is one team is one team, but you would think that knowing what we know about the Braves and we think about the branding of a lot of other franchises, they would be in the top quarter, you would think, of franchise health when it would come to finances. And for one of the top 6 or 7 franchises in terms of branding nationally to be sitting in those numbers, it's not the billions of dollars that you'd think a major league franchise would be rolling in, especially in a successful year.
And so from what I understand from an accounting perspective, what they're doing is this operating income, right? This operating income before interest on debt, the OEBITDA, it's called. This is one of the metrics you use to value a company. So when you come up with what's the valuation of the Atlanta Braves, EBITDA or OBITDA, these are the type of numbers that that go to the valuation. But when it comes down to your financial statements, from what I understand is happening here, is since these teams are diversifying, investing in these ballpark villages, in all of these real estates, they can then take off all of that depreciation and everything from these real estate investments when it comes down to their final financial statements and the net, right?
It makes it look a little bit more human than it may have otherwise been.
Exactly. And so the Cardinals, I was reading one of these analysis of the Cardinals from 2019. I believe in 2018, the Cardinals were able to report a $59 million operating income. But then after the depreciation and everything else, their net was actually a net loss of $32 million, right? And so it's how you look at it. I don't know. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a forensic accountant, so I couldn't tell you if this is just shady way or if this is how it goes. Obviously, this is how Trump was able to avoid paying taxes because he was a real estate guy, and this is how they do it. I don't understand.
You can mess with the books as long as you do it legally. The general public is just going to be confused, like we kind of are, at how that could possibly happen. But you couldn't tell anybody that the St. Louis Cardinals really lost that money during a year that was not pandemic related. It's just the way that they
invested that in other areas.
They dressed up their books.
They invested it in other areas.
Well, they spent the money, sure, but it's not like they lacked assets after that. It wasn't like that money went into a black hole never to be seen again.
But because of their spending, they lacked liquidity.
Which means that they would have what they believe would be leverage in these negotiations that, look, we are not as rich as you think we are. We are not paying you $100 million for this bonus pool that you created for what? What was the guy's name? The one guy?
Marty Cordova.
Yeah, there's one out of maybe a handful of examples over the last 2 decades that really needed that for his meteoric rise that he could not sustain.
Right. So I don't know if we're solving anything here, Emery.
Well, you and me could probably fix a lot more than they would because we function on, real people dollars, not bazillions of dollars, the way that, we're talking about insane numbers. But I do think we are going to, 20 years from now, you and I are going to be growing old, going to have adult children. We'll still love baseball, whatever it looks like 20 years from now. But this offseason is going to be pivotal. You know, a lot of people talk about 1994. There wasn't a lot of positives that came after that. Just a lot of hate, a lot of pessimism about baseball. It took a bunch of guys using roids and hitting 70 bombs a year for them to be like, okay, yeah, we kind of like this sport. I forgot. But we remember Curt Flood more than we remember 94. We remember Jackie Robinson, right? We remember those moments that kind of transcended what the game was. And I have this feeling that if this gets done in a way that more so favors the players, I don't know if they'll get everything they're asking for here, but if the players feel like this was a victory for them, even if we missed a month or 2 months of this season, which, again, for now, catastrophic.
Right.
But 20 years from now, I don't care if they ban the shift at this point. Like, I don't care. Like, I thought I would care. I don't. I think when they instituted a 3-point line in the NBA, I think a bunch of guys fell off their rockers and so they'd never watch the sport again. Turned out to be a really good idea. I feel that even though those kind of changes may not be for me, it could be for my grandkids. And it could keep the league healthy. It could be moving it into, gosh, the forward pass didn't get instituted into football until 30 years after it was invented. 30 years without the forward pass. It took them that long to figure out that maybe we should throw this thing forward. Okay? Crazy change has precipitated in a lot of sports, and a lot of this particular disgruntlement is about finances, which most of us fans just do not care about whatsoever. We just want you to spend money to put a quality team on the field. But I think in 20 years' time, we're going to look back and say this was pivotal in the history of baseball. For rule changes, for the future of negotiating collective bargaining agreements, probably for every North American sport. Because I guarantee when the NHL missed that entire season to a lockout, 17 years ago, it absolutely killed interest in their game. A lot of leagues were like, okay, we cannot do that. We cannot miss a full season of action because that's ridiculous. The NBA had their lockout in 2011. They figured it out. They missed about a month's worth of games. The NFL teased a lockout. They got back on the field before missing any games. When was that? It was like 2010 or something like that. Baseball is missing games for the first time since 1994 here. But I think the reason the players are going to justify the fact that they are going to be willing to do that is because they are going to be known as the guys who changed it forever in the way that it's viewed for the guys who play it, the fans who watch it, and even for the guys who decide that they want to be a part of an ownership group. And hopefully, when we are old men and our grandkids are going to their first baseball game, we can feel that there was a long-term positive outcome on these negotiations. Because right now, it sucks. Like, it really sucks.
Yeah, maybe I'm just sour about all of this.
But
I just don't. I don't think that
you should be. Though.
A CBA is going to change. Like all that's going to come of this, in my opinion, 10, 20 years from now, is remembering how greedy everybody was.
And there's a chance that you're right, and then the next collective bargaining agreement pops up, and
what
the same
came
thing
from
happens.
the '94 collective bargaining agreement?
We couldn't even what
exactly.
You don't even remember. I don't remember.
Right, 28 years ago, and I don't. All I think about is greed.
And all I think about is scabs, and we missed games.
Yeah,
we decided mid-season that you wanted to stop playing baseball, and completely robbed fans of the postseason. You killed the Montreal Expos. I mean, literally killed a franchise because of that. I mean, that was infinitely stupider than what we're doing now.
Is it? We don't know yet. It's not over.
I feel, though, deciding mid-season to stop playing games and miss the entire postseason, infinitely stupider than missing the beginning of one. That's my theory.
Well, right now we're missing the beginning of one.
And that's fair. And this could go on for a while. There's no direct end in sight.
The strike in 94 took baseball from the top sport in America. At that point, NFL was on its heels, and then NFL took over because of the strike.
I mean, it took over handily.
And now baseball's in a much different spot and can less afford that type of bad PR and screwing the fans over.
But my optimistic side, although I'm incredibly cynical about it now, I'm hoping that the reason the players feel this kind of negotiation is necessary and they are willing to miss games, because I think players' associations in years past would probably have been like, okay, we better just take what we can get and get on the field. I think these guys really feel like these changes are long-term answers to problems that have been simmering within their organization for years, for decades.
I know that's how they feel.
And if these changes are able to happen and the owners do feel like, okay, we need to start taking care of these guys,
this is where I struggle. These guys are taken care of.
And that's true, but their argument is that not all of them are as taken care of as we think they are.
Well, nor should they.
And you could make that argument
Nor
too.
should they all be taken care of that well.
The difference, and I agree, the difference in $750,000 base pay versus $500,000 or whatever it was, that's a huge jump for a guy who hasn't seen a pitch in professional baseball. And then you you multiply that by 70% of most organizations, because a lot of affiliated baseball is just a ton of young guys who don't even get to their second contract because they have to go 6 full years before anything like that could happen. And then you got to get to the 40-man. And then at that point, you're trying to battle for a spot on the major league roster. And as long as you keep funneling money and you're trying to grow this luxury tax or whatever to a point where more guys can get giant long-term deals, well, even less of these guys are going to be able to work their way to major league rosters now because of how much money more of you are getting paid for 8, 10, 12-year contracts. I mean, gosh, the Nationals offered a 13-year deal at Juan Soto. Okay, and how many Juan Sotos in the world could we possibly be trying to take care of here?
Yeah.
There's one guy like that every 15 years maybe, that at 22 years old is so underpaid that it's baffling. And it's the Chris Bryant conversation as well. It's like, okay, the idea that they held him down in the minor leagues for 3 weeks was solely to manipulate his service time so they didn't have to pay him. Fundamentally, that's a problem. Yes, we should be trying to fix that. But if we can fix those problems, and yes, a year earlier in arbitration, and yes, a year earlier in getting to free agency, I think those are positive movements that the players can say, okay, we did change the game. But at what point do you say, okay, maybe $100 million in this bonus pool, a little bit ambitious considering how much the owners are willing to give us on the other pieces of this puzzle?
Yeah, sometimes I just wonder from the player side, and once again, I think most of the fault here is on the owners. I want to be that clear. But where I'm struggling with the players is I'm trying to figure out all the time, who is this for? And it's such a small percentage of players, to your point, that these last few points are really for. And I don't think it's it's not the end of the world if somebody washes out of the major leagues at 28 years old because he wasn't going to go back and make $40,000 a year in AAA again. It's like, fine, retire. Go do something else with your life. It's okay. It happens to all of us.
And there will be another baseball player.
And there will be another, AAA baseball player to take your spot that's going to be just as good as you.
And they'll be happy to be in AAA.
Yeah. But I feel like this, I'm going around in circles, but the owners disgust me here with how they've played this negotiation. But I'm just a little bit baffled by where the players are digging their feet in. And I think both things are doing long-term damage to the game, and I hope they can get it figured out.
What did the minor league contraction do to this particular negotiation?
Just created more bad blood.
But you and I agree, probably a necessary step for baseball to do.
Yeah, that's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about. but it was an absolutely needs to happen. There's way too many minor league baseball teams still. Even after the elimination of 40, there's still too many. Now, do I want baseball to just vanish from those communities? I've said this before on this podcast. No, I want those teams to have an independent team, to be a college summer league. I want the grassroots game to be stronger than ever. But Major League Baseball continuing to subsidize 6 levels of affiliated minor league baseball doesn't make any sense.
Especially when the players are complaining about the guys in the lowest levels making peanuts and getting fed garbage food and can't afford a place to live. Well, it's because there's 200 of you guys that they're trying to pay instead of 100 of you guys.
Right.
So and again, that's an uncomfortable conversation because you feel like the minor league affiliation kind of makes your team matter in some way.
Right.
Even though you're 100% slave to the major league level, even when you're the single A affiliate, there's no way you're going to go. Like, you could go to the ballpark in a week and you're not going to see the same team out on the field because 3 levels up, they're manipulating their roster to try to get guys in the spots that they want. It's not really that big of a difference. You might actually even love your team more if it was in unaffiliated ball because your community would have control on what happened to that club.
Yeah, and that's a conversation for a different day. It's another rabbit hole. It all goes back to me with where we're at right now with this, because baseball has not done anything hardly at all over the past 5 years to create good PR. Now we've had good product on the field at times, and
sometimes it feels like it's never been better.
Well, the talent on the field's been good. The product has been great. The excitement's been good around the game itself. But every little decision they make has been bad, right? Everything that's coming out of the commissioner's office has been bad. Rule changes and canceling the All-Star game or moving the All-Star game, and then the lockout and the way they handled the pandemic and all of this stuff. It's just
7-inning doubleheaders.
Yeah, none of it makes any sense. And so we're going around in circles here, but I just can't believe the lack of self-awareness.
So what's it going to take for you to forgive them?
Forgive who?
All of them.
Well, I mean,
I get if they come back tomorrow and say we got a deal and we're going to get on the field by mid-April with regular season games.
I don't know if I'll ever come back around on Manfred.
Okay, and I think we can agree on that. But in terms of in good faith for you being a fan, you watch this circus kind of simmering for a couple of years now to come to a head right now. Is there a moment that you feel like, okay, if this were to happen, or if I see a game, or if I go to a game, or I watch a playoff game and it's beautiful and it's amazing and they go to extra innings and there's a walk-off home run and there's a lot of emotion, then, okay, they got me back. I feel like I can give my heart to this again.
Well, I'm going to be watching on opening day.
Yeah, but will you feel the same way?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, it's still baseball to me. I don't really understand how, like, when people get so caught up in like the this kind of stuff, or like, I'm never watching baseball again because this happened, or even like when people were kneeling for the national anthem, so I'm never watching the NFL again, or I don't watch the NBA anymore because of, the player empowerment era, or all this stuff. It's like, I don't know, I still kind of like sports.
Yeah,
I'm
guessing you didn't like it that much to begin with if you're willing not to watch it ever again.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I hate the owner, so I'm not going to watch the team. It's like, I don't know, I kind of still like the Twins.
I'm going to still watch, but isn't there a part of you that's like kind of sad that?
Oh, yeah, I'm sad right now.
But like I'm going to watch my team, but I'm not going to feel like it's going to take some time for me to feel the same way about them.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess.
Because all I know is that my guys in the field don't really, like, to a level they care about baseball, but they mostly care about them. And they don't care about us. And they don't care about the jerseys that we buy.
They've never cared about us.
And when this happens, in that, like, veil that you pretend to see the world through very innocent eyes and naive eyes gets pulled back, and you get to see like the mechanism working like this, like it stings beyond just I don't get to watch my favorite team play baseball. It stings like the guy who owns the team I cheer for and the players that I love to watch play for the team I cheer for hate each other. And these guys literally would play for any other team and feel the same way about the game.
That's just the reality. Like it's always been that way. It's
but
just
you pull
tough
that
for
veil
fans.
back, and it
yeah,
hurts.
And that's why I don't like. That's why I'm going to be watching, because I don't really. I know that's the case. I've always known that's the case, and I'm fine with that. I just like watching baseball, and that's why I'm looking forward to the game, and why it saddens me that we're not going to have that right away. So. Maybe to wrap things up here, Emery, what's your prediction on when opening day will occur?
I'm hoping for May 1st. I'm hoping for the beginning of May we get 80% of the regular season.
Is this your prediction as well as your hope?
This is, I'd say, my prediction. I think the pressure is going to ratchet up here. I think they are going to get a deal done sometime before the middle of March. I think they'll kind of ease into camp. I don't think they're going to be like, oh, we're going to jump into camp tomorrow. No, I think they're going to think, okay, well, if we start right at the beginning of May or even the last day or two of April, I'm not exactly sure what the calendar is, but they'll jump into a series, maybe a weekend series to get things going. They already said they're not adjusting. I think the players thinking that they can get paid for 162 games and missing a month, that's also probably going to be somewhat of a sticking point as the negotiations move forward now that they're missing games. But I think the pressure is going to be ratcheted up to get something done. They all look like clowns. I think most of America now hates Manfred and thinks the owners are the really greedy group here. But I also think the players have done themselves no favors in the way that they explain their side of things. It does sound pretentious. It does sound like, okay, exactly who, like it gets confusing. Who are you fighting for here? You say the future. Give me examples of what, like Chris Bryant is one. Okay, that makes sense. A guy like that should not have to toil in the minor leagues for 3 weeks to get his service time manipulated to prevent him from making more money sooner, because it's obvious that he deserves it. That's one singular case. That does not happen very frequently.
And
is this why we're locked out?
Chris Bryant ended up okay. That's where I always kind of go back on that, is like, show me the Chris Bryant that it went south for, that they manipulated his service time, and then he never made any money, and now he's, he had to retire for some reason.
He had Tommy John and never recovered.
Yeah. Like, show me that. But it's such, like, these are first world problems that they're arguing about, and it's hard to have a lot of sympathy for, like, the millionaires versus billionaires kind of thing.
Just so we can pay $70 to go watch them play.
Right. And not all Major League Baseball players are millionaires. I get that. But I go with that one. It's like, I don't feel sorry for the guys on the 40-man roster that, I don't feel sorry for them either, because they're living out so many other people's dreams too. So I just want a deal done.
What do you think?
I think May 15th, March 15th.
So you think?
No, excuse me, May 15th. I said that right.
So you think they'll start playing games on May 15th?
Yes.
So you think maybe by the early April is when the deal would get done?
Yeah, I still think we're a couple weeks away from a deal. I think, to your point, that it's going to get more complicated as we're missing games,
because we're going to be adding factors that they'll need to negotiate over.
Lost revenue, and so it's going to drive an even deeper wedge.
Wow, what a great sport.
I know. Hopefully they get it figured out.
Well, they're going to get it figured out.
This is where you need an adult in the room. This is where you need Robert Kraft in the room.
The players refused that. Remember, they were the owners multiple times were like, if we get just an independent negotiator here or an arbitrator or whatever that can just sit here and listen to both sides and try to pick out what makes the most sense. And the players were like, no, you're not. Like, we're
There's
getting
so much distrust.
We know what we want, and we're not going to let a third party guy try to tell us what we want.
Yeah, this is where you needed an owner that the players would trust, that could be essentially the
And there's your
middleman.
Cuban.
That's Robert Kraft in the last NFL deal, or a Mark Cuban. I use him. I don't know if he would be that guy in the NBA, but someone like that just carries weight and respect. But there's not a single baseball owner that they like or respect. So
Maybe Steve Cohen in a couple of years.
in a couple of years. Yeah. All right, Emery. Welcome to this season of the Moonlight Graham Show.
Hey, by the way, didn't get to say this earlier. An honor to be a part of the show. Love the work that you do. An avid listener. Thank you for helping me out on my shows and doing my pods and everything. And hopefully I get to do this again when
we get a deal
so
done.
sullen.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. You know I'm a big fan of yours as well. Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Absolutely.
And as the baseball lockout comes to an end, I think it's a good reminder that back in '94, if you remember, baseball had scab players, guys that were either in the minor leagues or low-level major league guys that crossed the picket line with the union to start the season as scab players. And I don't think we'll ever see that again in baseball, but let me remind you that one of the guys we've had here on the podcast, Mike Bush, who was an All-American tight end and an All-American baseball player at Iowa State back in the 80s. He's also Iowa State's all-time home run leader. He was the first Major League Baseball player to cross the picket line back in the strike of 1994, and we actually had him talk about that on the podcast. If you want to go back and listen to that one, Mike Bush back in the strike of 94, we covered that when he was playing with the Dodgers, and he made it to the major leagues before the strike, was a scab player, and then cracked the major leagues after the strike as well before continuing to play his career over in Asia after getting out of the major leagues after that fact. So that's a little bit of a interesting Moonlight Graham Show Iowa baseball history for you. As always, thank you for listening to the pod. Love you guys. Enjoy this season of the podcast, and have a great week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.